procrastinating, something she isn't prone to. But she would rather not go in. She would rather sit here in her new Ford Maxima and study the hypnotist's yard, and consider whether she, if she were the hypnotist's wife, would or would not have put the rose bed in the side yard instead of in front of the picture window, and whether she would have used so much ground cover by the walk, which is beginning to shimmer, incidentally, in the heat, as is the swing set beyond, from this moist June heat, or else from one of her headaches coming on. They often start with that shimmer, that special radiance just beyond the boundaries of vision, unless they wake her up at night. Another problem. Sybil approves, finally, of the hypnotist's wife. All you have to do is look at her yard. Even if she has children, she keeps order. Sybil approves of order with all her heart. Finally, she turns off the ignition and puts the key in her purse, which says Sybil on it in counted cross-stitch, and snaps the purse shut. A big, pretty willow in the hypnotist's front yard is beginning to shine, she sees, beginning almost to twinkle. Lord. Betty's nasal voice hoots softly in her ear. Girl, you haven't got a choice. I'd say you're right at the end of your rope. Sybil is out of the car now and walking up the hypnotist's walk, stepping smartly over his Roanoke Times. She's a good-looking woman, 47, although you'd never guess it to look at her. A woman somehow almost military in the way she carries herself, the way her pretty graying hair is cut and waved so short, the way her gold clip-on earrings match the stick pin in the lapel of her navy blazer, and the way her clear red lipstick is so precisely applied. An attractive, efficient woman. People have said she looks like Julie Andrews. Sybil's best friend Betty put her up to this hypnotist thing. Of course, Betty believes in aerobics and astrology also, dubious practices which she cited in urging Sybil to try the hypnotist. There are things beyond our control, I tell you, Sybil, Betty said, squinting through her Salem smoke one morning last week in Sybil's dinette. And the fact is, a person can only go without sleep for so long unless becoming a zombie. The fact is, Dr. Rowland has as much as said he can't cure your headaches, and said if he was you, he'd go to a psychiatrist muy pronto. Isn't that true? Betty says things like muy pronto since she went on the Mexican tour. Sybil, sleepless and badgered, nodded. But she didn't want to go, they both knew, to a psychiatrist. Sybil regarded her unconscious, like she regarded her reproductive system, as a messy, murky darkness full of unexplained fluids and longings which she preferred not to know too much about. Except perhaps it was true, as Dr. Rowland apparently believed, that something down in there was out of whack. Anyway, psychiatry was a real expense, and her Blue Cross from the technical school would only cover 60% of it. The hypnotist, Betty's idea, was a lot cheaper, $25 per hour. Of course, Sybil didn't know if Blue Cross would cover him or not. But Betty swore a hypnotist could put you in a trance, and ask you point-blank what was the problem, and you'd spit it right out. Not have to go on and on for months, spilling your guts at $50 a shot. Plus, Betty saw a lady hypnotist on the noon show one time who could cure just about anything, along with the videotapes of a woman who formerly stammered. Sybil, walking, has reached the hypnotist's front door and has turned right, following the tidy brick walk around to the side of the house. Betty said that hypnosis, like astrology, is beyond the rational mind. Betty went on to say that if oysters are taken from the Atlantic Ocean and put into Lake Michigan, for instance, They will continue to open and close their shells in sequence with the tides in the Atlantic, because the pull of the moon is so strong. Nobody understands it, Betty said. It's beyond the rational mind. Sybil stared hard at Betty's close-set little eyes. Betty, Sybil said, we are not an oyster. And Betty blinked rapidly through the smoke and said, No, of course not. But Sybil called the hypnotist after all. And now she's here, rounding the corner of the ranch house at 108 Mountainside Drive, feeling like a zombie. Normally, Sybil would appreciate, for instance, these roses. But today she hates the peace rose, the way its colors run into each other. She hates that lavender rose with its petals shading to purple. Sybil likes a solid rose, red or yellow or white or pink, something definite. Up until now, she has been in control of every minute of her life. Through a sliding glass door at the side of the house, Sybil sees the hypnotist, his back to her, writing at his desk. His office looks like a study, like a professor's office, with bookshelves lining the walls and wing chairs. Sybil feels the flush on her face as she knocks on the glass. Of course, it's so hot today. It's not a headache. They say there might be a heat inversion. The reflected rose bed shimmers in the sliding glass door, and right behind the reflection, there's the hypnotist himself, unlatching the door and extending his hand, presenting himself on a wave of air conditioning. And he's short. A little bitty rumpled man who comes up to Sybil's earrings. A small, fat, untidy man who looks like he might be wearing his pajamas, only of course he's not. That's just his short-sleeved shirt, his droopy little slacks. Miss Hess? He asks. Dr. Diamond? Sybil responds. The hypnotist smiles. Call me Bob, he says. I won't, Sybil thinks. I will not. He wears round eyeglasses with pink plastic rims. His tiny hand feels like foam rubber. Sybil shakes it vigorously. He ushers her inside and seats her somehow, without seeming to, in the wing chair facing his desk. The hypnotist picks up a clean pad of paper and a ballpoint pen, the same kind Sybil buys by the dozen at Rose's to grade her papers. Miss Hess, why have you come to see me? The hypnotist begins gently, almost idly. Sybil stares out the door at his wife's rose garden, framed now by an iridescence she doesn't much like. She closes her eyes, then opens them, and looks directly at the hypnotist. Well, Bob, Sybil finally says, I'm right at the end of my rope. Bob smiles, a nice little smile which stays mostly in his eyes. He is not one bit scary. He would never do something like put you in a trance and then tell you that after you wake up, you will bark like a dog whenever you see chocolate. Sybil has heard of that somewhere. I have these headaches, she says. Tell me about them. Bob fiddles around with his ballpoint pen. He seems patient, real slow, like he has all the time in the world. Speaking of which, Sybil doesn't even see a clock in his office. How will he know when the hour is up? Sybil glances down at her watch quickly so she'll know, so she can tell if he tries to short her on time. Your headaches, Bob says. Sybil takes a deep breath. She knows she has to tell it, and tell it all, or else she'll be wasting her money. But instead, she says, This is so embarrassing. Bob looks up. Why? He asks.